Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the seminar on the systematic differentiation of Yínqiào Sǎn and Sāngjú Yǐn, which is essentially also an introduction to the wenbing Taobian, which has been, well, half of it has been translated by myself and Alan. Give me a moment. Give me a moment. I'll grab the book. Oh, sorry, I forgot that I didn't have it on my desk. But this is a copy. China Books has a hard copy. My good friend and colleague Melissa Renshaw will be posting some links in the chat where you can purchase it as well. They'll have a hard cover as well, which I do recommend. The soft covers are nice, but the hard covers are just that much nicer. Okay. So they've helped us put this on tonight as well. So thank you very much to China Books. I'll just have a little bit of a brief introduction. This talk should go for about an hour and a half. I'll probably skip over a few bits and pieces just because it's in the book as well, some of the slides, and you can always read them in your own time. And also if you miss anything, I'll upload this video so you can always go back and rewatch it if you want. So first off, well, also my screens will change how bright I am. Sorry. The Academy of Source-Based Medicine, or ASBM. This is currently where I am teaching online. I'll talk a little bit about the course that I'm doing, but online we have a course run by a guy in Taiwan called Wú Jūtōng. He translated a book by a very famous modern Chinese Jingfeng, a classical formula physician called Lo Kun, which you can also buy through China Books. And he has written a course on the Shanghai Lun, at least the beginning formulas to give you the basic framework. And he's currently working on his second part of that course as well. There's also another course by a guy called Ivan Zavala, and he's written a course about the Neijing and acupuncture as well. So it's a real interesting course that is backed up by the research of arguably the most famous, well, maybe not most famous, but the most robust historian in China, a guy called Huang Longxiang. And his research is really top notch, and it will make you, even if you read the Neijing a few times, it will make you look at it and think about it quite differently, because he really has pieced together a lot of missing puzzles in the history. So a little bit about me as well. Coming up. My name is Michael Brown. I've worked on a few translations, mostly editing Alan's work, but I've done some acupuncture. We've done some herbs. We've done some with Zhang Jingye. We've done the first volume of the Wenbing Taobian. We did my acupuncture book, The Explanations of Channels and Points. This one here. That was 6 years ago, maybe 2 or 3 days ago. It came up on my Facebook that was 6 years ago. So it's time has really flown. I didn't think when I did my first translation that we would then be doing something like this nearly one a year. In the works as well is a acupuncture book on Sam acupuncture, or a Korean style of acupuncture. And we'll also hopefully next year be finishing up the second volume of the Wenbing Taobian as well. So what I'm doing is I'm teaching a course online right now. And this is called The Ancient and Modern Clinical Application of Acupuncture Channels and Points. And I'm running block 1 right now, which is the lung and large intestine. And this is the goal here is to really provide a link between the classics and clinical practice, but also understanding, well, and analyzing how famous physicians utilize this point in clinic. So it's not just the exercise and theory. We look at the theory, we look at how it's being approached, and we try to then, use it in clinic and apply it. We talk about case studies as well. I've tried to also use a little bit of like artwork to think about how do we look at the points, like Chizhe being kind of a marsh at the Chu, and Taiyuan being like a supreme abyss, to try and give a little bit of a visual representation, because a lot of the points have kind of interesting meanings as well. And when we just study the point number, we kind of lose that when we are looking at that approach as well. So some of the slides, for example, in looking at lung 1, we look at how Li Shijian, a very famous modern acupuncturist, this is his book called something like commonly used clinical application of acupuncture points. It was translated into English as well, but it's not available by. This version was written, I think, in about 1985 and was given to me by Greg Bantic. And my course is quite heavily based, at least on how he's written this book. I include other famous people, but I've never seen another acupuncture book quite like this one, and it really is just amazing. And I think it has a lot of really good information. And what I try to do is also I try to bring in a lot of cases as well, because I think that is what is missing in our medicine when we learn at a lot of schools. We get taught theoretical ideas and we look at made up case studies, but we never look at how famous physicians have written. Yeah. Yep. Just someone's written in chat. It's very small writing, and yeah, I know these are just example slides. You can there's Mel will post some links in the chat, and you can have a look. And I go through some examples there as well. But it's just to be an example. It's not to kind of talk about. Okay, so that's just our introduction, and we're going to talk a little bit now about the lecture. Okay, so talk a little bit about an introduction to warm diseases, a brief discussion of relevant historical figures as well. I really, really love the history of Chinese medicine and the authors, and often just the unique style that they bring. So I really enjoyed writing that aspect, but it was also very difficult because there was so many people that I actually did want to talk about that I had to unfortunately remove. Talking about Wú Jūtōng as well, who's the author of the Wenbing Tiabian, and then we talk a little bit about the structure of the Wenbing Tiabian as well, and also um, talking about then the two formulas that we'll look at as well. Just give me one moment, sorry. Okay. So first off, I like to give respects to people who heavily kind of influenced my style. And a lot of the formulas that when I look at the Wenbing Taobian, the formulas, I really look at whether what this very famous author called Zhang Wenxuan has written. He's written three books. Two of them I find very, very useful for Wenbing Taobian. And he is very much what I would call integrationalist. So I butchered that word. And where he combines the Shanghan and well Jingfang, Shanghan, Jingwei with Wenbing Tabian as well. He had some incredible teachers. One of them being Lu Duzhou, very very famous Shanghan practitioner, and the other being another very famous Shanghan and Wenbing practitioner called Jia Shaoqin as well. And this guy is just really really. I really enjoy how he writes, and he has very insightful commentaries about the Wenbing formula as well. So I think it's important that, I hope maybe one day some people will translate his books as well. But he really argues that both of the books, the Shanghan Jingwei and the Wenbing Taobian are necessary in clinic. So these are his two books. The one on the right is about a guy called Ye Tianshou, who we'll talk about later. And then the one on the left is his own formula patterns as well. And what I think he's tried to do is much like in Shanghan and Jingwei formulas, Jingfang, we look at a formula pattern. He's tried to look at a formula pattern for Wenbing formulas as well, which is, I don't think someone else wrote that before him as well. So that's quite a unique approach. And quite a few of the insights from today's lecture are from his book as well. So really important to how do you say, respect him as well and his writings. And I actually found out I got some videos of my acupuncture teacher, who was a well-known lady called Waveney Holland, and she actually had some videos by Zheng Swan that AACMA recorded maybe in 1999 or something like that, so nearly 26 years ago. So I think he had come out to Australia and lectured as well. Unfortunately, I don't have a VHS now, but I want to have a look at them at some point. I think that's really cool though. So that's just a little bit of an introduction to Zhongwen Swan. And we're gonna have now a little bit of a discussion about cold damage and warm diseases. There's a interesting idea that's discussed about where people say all warm diseases cold damage. There are arguments for that, and I think there's good reason to think about it as well. And one of the most common arguments that I've seen is discussion from Nanjing difficulty 58, which states the 58th difficulty says, how many types of cold damage or Shanghan are there? And, what do their pulses change or not? The answer is, or the response is, there are 5 types of cold damage: wind strike or zhongfang, cold damage, damp wolf, heat disease, and warm damage, wenbing. Their respective sufferings are all different. So here he's arguing that basically, well, people say that, oh, Shanghan has all these types of diseases as well. They all come under the umbrella of cold damage. My opinion on this, and I'd thought about it, but I hadn't actually found any textual evidence, was it that it's actually laying it down a framework of how to understand cold damage. Is that while there is like cold damage, or well, how do you say, like a warm disease of cold damage, I think that you could also argue that there is like a how do you say, like a sorry, let me a warm disease of cold damage. There's also a cold damage of warm disease as well. So it's just looking at this methodology. It's not like this is the only way to do it. This is just laying out a framework. And the reason why I would argue that is that in difficulty 49 and 50 is that they talk about this idea of 5 evils, where each of one of the evils can invade a certain element. So you can have like wood invading fire. You can have water invading fire, metal invading fire, earth invading fire, and things like that. And so this is a framework. When you look at it, each of these damages are represented by a phase or an element, and it's just laying out a pattern. But I don't think that pattern is perhaps the only way that we can look at it. And I thought about this, and then when I was reading a text called the Guilin Shanghan Lun, which is perhaps you could say it like a lineage type of Shanghan Lun study as well. And in this text, I noticed they actually had a discussion on warm diseases added on at the front of the text. So this, you won't find this in any of the translated versions of the Shanghan Lun, not unless someone wants to translate the Guilin Shanghan Lun. But here, don't worry too much about the symptom or the formula. But what he does is he talks about like a dryness disease, and he says, "Oh, this is a dryness due to evil invading the heart, or this is due to a heat evil invading a dryness evil invading the heart, or a heat evil invading the spleen, or wind evil invading the kidneys." And so, in my opinion, this is a representation of the model that Nanjing 58 lays out, where that it lays out a model, and then you can apply it in the way that the 5 evils have been applied in Nanjing 49 and 50. And anyway, that's just like a little bit of theoretical theory crafting. We don't have to worry too much about that. But that's kind of just a little bit of something that I think to think about when people say all warm diseases cold damage or not. Okay. So one other thing to think about is, out of all the schools that have been prominent in Chinese medicine, I would argue that both the cold damage school and the warm disease school are probably the most prominent as well. You could possibly make an argument also for the yin nourishing school as well of Zhudan Shi, which heavily influenced a lot of authors, and probably is also that, along kind of with what you might say is like the warm supplementing school of Zhang Jingyue. Those two have probably heavily influenced TCM, probably more so than the cold damage or the warm damage or the warm disease schools. But I remember reading this statement by Xu Lingtai in one of his discussions on the Shanghan Lun, and he says that cold damage most frequently affects the heart, as the heart occupies the position corresponding to Tai Yang. The heart is a sovereign ruler, and cold is a vicious evil. And that is also how do you say, like a terminology used for one of the five evils, whether you could say it's a vicious evil or wicked evil, thieving evil, something like that. And it says where when the sovereign or imperial fire is insufficient, cold chi can injure it. So people fail to recognize that the cold evil invades the dominion of the sovereign ruler, and this embodies the principle of water overcoming fire. So he says that fire invading lung is also a vicious evil. Okay. So what does that mean? So when we look at the five phases, we can see that cold damage is this idea of, let me draw. This is water and this is fire. So we can see that cold damage is this idea of, when we look at it from a five phase perspective, fire invading, water invading fire. Okay. And so what is then cold? What is warm disease? Oh, there we go. There's the arrow. Warm disease is then fire invading metal. Okay. So really, at fire is kind of both at the kind of pivot at both of these diseases, in my opinion. That's why I think they're kind of arguably the most kind of written about and discussed. So that's a little bit of an introduction to kind of a little bit of the theory of warm disease and cold damage. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the history. So no matter what, you can't start discussing herbalism if you don't start with Zhang as well. And once again, people might say, well, cold damage formula, they're only for treating cold damage as well. But that's simply not true, as well. Just as much in my opinion that all warm diseases are cold damage. Not all cold damage formulas are not all for just treating cold as well. There's when you read the Shanghai Lun, you'll see that there's formulas for heat, even dampness as well. A lot of cold, obviously cold diseases as well. And then, you can also, if you want to then bring in the Jingui as well, it also treats a wide variety of diseases as well. So, Zhang Zhongjing, he basically lays the groundwork for almost all herbalism to come after him as well. And basically, every herbalist respects his work as well. Even if they perhaps disagree with it, they'll write a little bit of a reason why, but they still, agree with the majority of it as well. So what does Zhang Zhongjing kind of lay the groundwork for? He lays it for six-channel diagnostics. So the Liu Jing. He also lays a lot of discussion about Wei Qi and Ying Qi theory as well. When you read the Jingui, he talks about triple burner theory as well. He talks about the upper jiao, the lower jiao, and then also there's a lot of formulas that will treat the middle as well. Even one like Li Zhongwan, right? Literally to rectify the middle. He talks about these ideas of the chi and the blood and the water as well that come through. I think that, as people have studied the text, they've also come up with a lot more different, how do you say, ways of studying it as well. Whether you want to look at it like through these ideas of the six chi or even five phases, or how do you say, opening, closing, pivot. There are a lot of different ways that you can kind of study the Shanghanlun. Now, who came after the Shanghanlun is none other than Wang Shuhe. Okay. Wang Shuhe, he didn't know Zhang Zhongjing, and he was the author of the Mai Jing. And I believe the story is that he found his work in the library and it was kind of all messed up. So he basically recompiled the Shanghai Lun as well. So we are very, very lucky that Wang Shuhe found his work and recompiled it, because without him, Chinese medicine would have taken a very, very different course, I think. But that doesn't mean, for all his good deeds, that doesn't mean that he escapes criticism. As we're going to see, Wú Jūtōng, this is a commentary from the Wenbing Tiaobian chapter 2.1, and this is what he has to say about Wang Shuhe. Okay. Sorry, give me a moment. Let me just make that a little bit bigger so that I can see it on my screen. Okay. He says that the 9 terms are frequently referenced in notes regarding cold damage by Wang Shuhe. That is an additional chapter to the preface of the Shanghai Lun that I think hasn't really been translated in English. Well, you won't find it in any of the full translations of the Shanghai Lun. Some people might have translated it online. But anyway, he goes, furthermore, Wang Shuhe referenced passages from the canon of difficult issues to sanctify his claims. Regarding his opinion that disease develops in accordance with fixed time periods, he says such diseases do in fact exist. So that would mean, either relating to like how do you say the heavenly stems and branches, or possibly even related to the seasons. He goes, during his time when Wang Shuhe treated diseases, he truly encountered such cases. However, he failed to develop an alternate treatment approach for them. His mention of these conditions and notes regarding cold damage comes across as rather disorganizing and lacking clear direction. Viewing the treatise on cold damage as a source of brilliant methods for treating external contraction, he included all forms of external contraction in notes regarding cold damage and proposed to treat them all with the same cold damage treatment method. Unable to overcome this obstacle, later generations persisted in their irresponsible and lackluster approach for more than a millennium, leaving a legacy of endless disasters. This can all be traced back to the ill-advised precedent set by Wang Shuhe. So this is a quote from Wú Jūtōng from the Wenbing Bien. So, he kind of blames Wang Shuhe, even though this chapter was in Zhang Zhongjing's book, but people often say that it was written by Wang Shuhe. We don't really know any or who wrote it, or where it came from, but it was still very early. But anyway, they kind of, instead of blaming Zhang Zhongjing, he kind of blames Wang Shuhe, which is a little bit funny. So we're gonna skip a couple of 100 years, and we're gonna go to a guy called Luansu. Okay, Luansu was one of the first authors to start writing in a little bit more of a kind of poetic and philosophical style. And this was quite common around the Jinyuan dynasty. And they also got quite a bit of criticism from later doctors as well, that they kind of just wrote a lot about theory without too much practicality about it as well. But Lu Wansu, his most famous work that most people would know is this one here, which is the Suwen Xuanji Yuan Bingshe. Sorry, my pronunciation is very bad. And this one discusses Suwen chapter 74, the 19 pathomechanisms of disease as well. And Lu Hezhen actually includes another one in there, as well as includes his own disease discussions as well. And he found that at the time that he was writing, that a lot of the formulas generally focused on warming and heating. So he came up with some ideas of how to maybe cool the body in certain ways. And he is often classified as being the founder of the cooling school as well, which I think when people get classified in these kinds of groups, like Li Dongyuan in the supplement, what do you say? Like something like Nourishing Earth School or something like that, is that while some of them might have had that as their main treatment emphasis, even in this Lu Wansu, you can see that he wrote texts about the Shanghan Lun there, two texts about the Shanghan Lun. And he tried to basically supplement what was missing at that time, or what he thought needed more attention. It wasn't that he was like, okay, I'm just going to cool everyone. I'm going to ignore the Shanghan Lun formulas. Everyone's getting a cooling formula. No, it wasn't anything like that, in my opinion. It was much more that he wanted to supplement the medicine with some more cooling formula as well, which he felt that perhaps were lacking at that time. So there's another very famous guy called Wang Andao, and he lived this must have been about the Yuan dynasty, and he wrote one famous work as well. And Wú Jūtōng sort of says that this was a very important work because this was the first time that someone started to argue that you should differentiate treatment between cold and heat diseases as well. But his medical work was very, very small, and it was just a couple of essays as well. But he was sort of pointed to as the first person that looked at this, well, kind of like differentiating the two treatment styles. He was also quite a famous artist as well, so we still have his art there as well. So yeah. Now, after him, we have a guy called Fang Yezai or Fang Zhongxing. Okay. And he wrote another a text that is obviously been quite influential to a lot of our later authors coming as well. He I can't remember, I don't know if he wrote much more than this text, but it was called the Shangalun Tiabian as well. So the same Tiabian that is in the Wenbing Tiabian as well. So often what they might call that is like a line by line analysis. The Tiabian means something like line by line analysis. Whereas, we didn't choose that term for the Wenbing Tiabian because how do you say it? It was his own writing. So whereas Feng Yuezai is commentating on the Shanghan Lun, so he's doing a line analysis of the Shanghan Lun. When Wú Jūtōng wrote the Wenbing Tiabian, it was his own writing, and it was more to kind of look at the systematic differentiation of the disease as a whole. So it wasn't quite right to use that same kind of translated term as well. And what he was really famous for was that he argued that the structure of the Shanghanlun, when it was recompiled by our friend Wang Shuhe back in what, like 260, 280 AD, that he actually compiled it incorrectly. So he was the founder, or whether you want to call him founder, or people just kind of give him that title, of a school called the Misplaced Scroll School. So these authors would rearrange the Shanghanlun into ways that they saw would make sense to them, or what they viewed as the original composition. Obviously, they had no idea what the original composition was, but it didn't stop them from trying to recompile it into certain ways of looking at it and discussing it. Now, if we have a look here, we can actually see that there was quite a few different texts that use the title Tiabian. So one of the most famous ones that came out of that was the Shura Tiabian, which is the um, systematic differentiation of damp heat. Okay. A little bit after that, you have the systematic differentiation of Shanghan and Wen-Yi. So cold damage and something like warm epidemic or warm pestilence, however you want to translate that. And then in 1798, you have our good friend, the Wenbing Taobian by Wú Jūtōng as well, systematic differentiation of warm diseases. And then in 1868, you have another text called the Liu Tiabian, or the systematic differentiation of the six influences as well, or basically the six evils as well. So, I found that kind of interesting, because if you're using someone's kind of title in your work, in my opinion, there's quite a kind of clear homage to that person, that you're respecting their work and what they're doing as well. So after that, we then have another very famous guy called Wu Youke or Wu Youxing. He wrote probably the first text that you would argue is a text on warm disease, or in the warm disease school, called Treatise on Warm Epidemics, or the Weni Lun as well. Okay, in 1642. And in that, he proposed that warm epidemics are not typical cold damage or seasonal diseases, but rather contagious conditions caused by what they call abnormal qi or perverse qi, which enter the body through the mouth and nose rather than through the skin, as described in cold damage. He strongly criticized the shortcomings of cold damage methodology in treating such diseases, and he actually advocated for a fundamentally different approach. He also further hypothesized that this evil of this warm epidemic would enter what they call the Mo-Yuan, or the membrane source as well, shortly after contraction, where then it could remain latent in that kind of membrane source as well. And in that, you sort of then you get a lot of different theories kind of regarding the membrane source and the Sangju as well. But our friend Wú Jūtōng has something to say about him. He says, Wu Yuke asserted that warm diseases do not pertain to cold damage, and that warm diseases are prevalent while cold damage is uncommon. He says this is highly perceptive. But he then states, however, in refuting the notion that epidemics arise due to the presence of 6G outside of their respective seasons, he inevitably erred by focusing on one matter while overlooking another. And this is important because I think he basically is saying that this idea of epidemics only can occur when there's a presence of chi that doesn't relate to that season. So relating to one of the four kind of like, well, the seasons of, like hot, cold, wind, dryness, things like that. And he says that if these diseases, if that chi is prevalent outside of that season, then that might be what happens there as well. And basically Wú Jūtōng says, no, that's not the case. Okay. Now, we got another guy called Yu Chung as well. And he wrote quite a few works as well. He was also with the Misplaced School, or the Misplaced Scrolls School, sorry. And the first two books are both basically kind of a reconstruction of the Shanghanlun. His this one, the Yimin Falu, is basically about some core tenets of the medicine. And this one down here, I'm not really sure about the best way to translate that, but that's his case studies text as well. So he wrote a book about how he treated people and his cases. Now, when I was reading his book, he had quite an interesting part about the Sangju. And one important quote that I'm sure that we all have heard about the Sangju is that the Nanjing states the heart governor together with the triple burner form an exterior-interior pair. They both have a name, yet are without form. And this is always kind of interests me a little bit because we had this character there called Xing. And it's like, well, what does that character actually mean? And this is where I found this quote in his work that I found was quite interesting, where he goes, "What is referred to as form or xing does not mean that there is an object separate from the others zhangfu, but it merely indicates a defined region and function metaphorically referred to as form." So what this basically is saying is that it's not that they like they don't exist. It's just that you can't like cut someone's heart governor out. I mean, or the pericardium, depending on how you want to say it, it's kind of part of the heart. You can't cut someone's Sangju out like you can cut someone's liver out. Not that you should do these things, but I'm just saying hypothetically, right? Um, or someone's, stomach or their spleen or their intestines. You can take them out. They have like a physical, tangible form. But your Sangju and pericardium, they're harder to have a form. No. I might need to start moving a little bit quicker through some of these guys. I really do enjoy the history. So this is another guy called Zhang and Wú Jūtōng, the author of Wenbing Taobian, also quotes Yu Chang, he quotes Zhang Lu, he quotes Wu Youke. He quotes like all these authors throughout history. So that's why I've tried to include them a little bit as well. But Zhang Lu, he also wrote a lot about Shanghanlun. He actually wrote three texts on the Shanghanlun as well. He wrote a text about herbs. This is a text on diagnosis. He actually, as far as I know, he's the only person to ever write a commentary on Sun Miao's work as well, which is the actually I'm not sure of how to pronounce that character there, sorry, but it's basically a discussion. But his most famous work is probably the Sāngjú Yǐn as well, which is what they call a synthesized or synthesis text where it brings in a lot of different ideas about treating different diseases. But what's quite interesting for him is actually this text here as well, which is because he started writing about tongue diagnosis. So if you guys haven't never seen it, this is how they used to look at tongue diagnosis as well. So, they might say like like thick white, yellow, white. I'm not sure. Maybe that's a dry white thick coat. Then, white, yellow there as well. That maybe might be red and white. Um, things like that. So they would write kind of like different ways of looking at the tongue, and then they would often give like a formula or something like that. So for example, here, Sini-san is there to give. This one uses Jedu tongue as well. Um, if there's a version called give Wuling-san. So they have all these kinds of the tongues would be linked with herbal formula as well. So when I saw that, I thought that was quite interesting to see. So our next guy is Ye Tianshi as well, and he's a very, very, very famous guy in terms of warm disease as well. In fact, he wrote the text that Ye Tianshi quotes called the Wenrui Lun, or the treatise on warm heat as well. And there's other text that's very famous is the Lunjiang Junan Yiyan, which is basically like a clinical guide to medical cases as well. So both of those texts are very important. And actually, what's interesting is that in his text on medical cases, Wú Jūtōng actually bases some of his formulas on his case studies as well. So, I found that really, really cool that he kind of brings these case studies in this book, and then he kind of creates like I guess like a more kind of, I don't know, like a systematic way of approaching it and using it. And we're going to see that in some of when we talk about the formulas. So one of the most important things looking at his text is that is the first line, which states, when warm evil intrudes into the upper burner, it initially evades the lung, then may counterflow transfer into the pericardium. So that's when things go really wrong. It will go into the pericardium. The lung governs qi, which belongs to the wei, and the heart governs blood, which belongs to the yin. Now, why does the pericardium take it? Ling Shu chapter 71 states that, therefore, the various evils which are when they are located in the heart, in fact, all of them actually located in the pericardiac network. So Ling Shu chapter 71 basically says that no, when an evil comes into into the heart, it's not actually in the heart, it's in the pericardium. You can say that's just semantics, but that's just the way that they look at it. Now, another very famous guy called Wang Kentang, he's the most prolific author in pre-modern Chinese medicine that I've seen. He wrote a text called "Heaven Has Two Fires" because it's one of the questions that I thought about. I don't know. For me, sometimes I just think about things in Chinese medicine that maybe don't make sense. Like, why does the body have two fires? And so I thought about that. I had some of my own theories, but this was the first time that I've seen someone write about this. And he lived about 15th or 16th century. And he writes this essay where he goes, summer heat is also a form of fire. So why is there specifically two forms of fire? The sovereign fire or imperial fire does not act directly. The ministerial fire takes its place. Hence, there are two fires, and this is inherent. One must examine the terms yin and yang. Fire obtained by focusing sunlight with a concave is the yang fire of heaven. The fire of dragon thunder is the yin fire of heaven. What is dragon thunder? Well, that just means lightning, right? Fire from drilling wood or striking stones is the yang fire of earth. The fire of oil or petroleum is the yin fire of earth. So have you ever thought about, the fact that we can actually make fire out of petrol or some of these types of liquids as well? Which then, that might be why they started to think more of this prevalence of Ming Men theory or kind of fire within water. The sovereign fire of Junho of the Bing and Ding, the heart is the young fire of humans. The ministerial fire of Shangho of the triple pericardium. The Bing and Ding is the Bing, I think, is small intestine, and Ding is the heart, yeah. And triple burner and pericardium and gate of life. Ming Men is the yin fire of humans as well. So I've never heard of anything like that about why we might have a yin fire, but I thought that was really, really interesting. So finally, we get to Wú Jūtōng, and he's like, "Well, hold up, guys. Let's hear what I have to say." Um, we'll talk a little bit about his biography, but basically, he came from Jiangsu province. At 19, he lost his parents and he fell into poverty. He also gave up his studies for the imperial examination, which is what basically every kind of person in China wanted to do. And he traveled to the capital city. At that time, the four branches of literature, which is called in Chinese something like the Suku Chuanshu, had just been established. So he was hired as a copyist and he basically paid his own way through that. And what was he writing what was he copying the books for? Basically medicine. So he basically got to read every single text in the imperial archives on Chinese medicine. And I can tell you, the amount of writings that they had was pretty crazy. So it says, that he obtained a copy of the inner canon, the miraculous pivot, the canon of difficult issues, and he really loved those. And then he also found the cold damage and golden cabinet, and he realized that nothing could surpass those in the study of medicine. And therefore, after he dedicated himself to studying those classics, and then after he then further studied some various masters, and he attempted to keep what he thought were correct ideas and theories and discarding what he thought was improper. And as such, he made great strides in his learning. When I read that quote, I always think of a very famous quote by Confucius as well. And I apologize because my Chinese isn't very good, but Confucius says something like, San Ren Xing Bi Yo Wu Shi Yan, which means amongst three people doing, one must be my teacher. And for the good, I take it, and for the bad, I leave it or amend it. And so here, what I think he's doing is he's kind of like when he's reading through everything, he's sort of saying, well, this is good. I'll keep this. This is bad. Or, I'll discard it. Or this might have some merit, but it needs to be changed into something that can be used. So he continues and he goes, all six chi can inflict disease. However, with the treatise on cold damage being the only extant work, later generations proceeded to treat all types of external contractions using the same cold damage methodology. And he said, when this proved ineffective, they argued that acrid warming substances could not be used, and they each devised their own formula and methods. He goes, but nevertheless, none were able to go beyond the scope of the treatise of cold damage. It was Liu Shoujian or Liu Hejian or Liu Wansu, the guy of the cold damage school, who basically, and Wu Youke were the first to recognize that. So we can see Wú Jūtōng basically says that, even though he kind of criticized Wu Youke, he still says that he was one of the first people to start moving Chinese medicine in a different course. But he goes, it was not until Ye Tianshi who truly, discovered how to treat warm diseases and was able to create a distinction between the two of them. So he basically said, after learning from Ye Tianshi, he created the systematic differentiation disease where he included all these different ones. And he goes, yeah, so we'll just continue that. But basically, he also said that in his biography that he came up with a formula called Pili-san, which basically saved a whole bunch of people. And we don't need to read the rest of this. This is just also in the book as well. Okay. He wrote two other texts as well. So the biography that we just read is from this first book as well. And then he wrote another book with his medical cases as well. And I'm not sure of the date of that. I've looked at it. I've tried to see a few ideas, but I actually haven't seen an official date as well. So this book that he wrote the Wén Bing Tiao Bian in 1798. So he wrote this one nearly 30 years after, and this one just has a few essays about the medicine, about his approach and things like that. And his medical cases are also quite interesting because you see he uses quite a few Shanghan Lun formulas and things like that, He's not strictly just using his own formulas. So I thought I would just include this nice essay from his book on remedying the faults of physicians, where he talks about Juyo. And he says that the Neijing states that those who believe in shamans but not physicians are beyond help. How could shamanic rituals be influenced under the field or be included under the field of medicine? In my view, whenever one treats internal injuries, Neishang, one must first Juyo. That sometimes is translated as like a shamanic ritual, but he goes, so Wú Jūtōng is redefining this term. He goes, so what is Juyo? Juyo is thoroughly explain the origin and nature of the disease so the patient understand it and dare not repeat the same mistakes. Beyond that, one must grasp the various hidden emotional states, whether it is the exertions of laborers or the unspoken grievances of wives. Employ gentle words to guide them, sober words to jolt them, and stern words to strike fear in them. When they are truly convinced in their heart and mind, and can the treatment achieve miraculous effect? Oops, sorry, that's it. But I just like that story a little bit because it kind of reorients this term from being this shamanic ritual to actually meaning, hey, we have to look at it from what is causing the disease as well. Look, I have no problems with people wanting to do the shamanic rituals and things like that, but in my opinion, we should make a distinction about that to what is the medicine that is practiced in Chinese medicine, and try not to blur the lines between the two of them. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the structure of the text now, and then we'll get into the formulas as well. So one thing that I always like to do when I look at a text is to try and understand how is it structured. I've looked at hundreds and hundreds of Chinese medical texts. No joke. Just even to give you an example, on my desk here, this is the Qing Dynasty collection. This is volume 3, and it goes up to volume 15. And these are all acupuncture texts as well. So 15 volumes on acupuncture texts. And I also have 15 volumes on Ming Dynasty acupuncture texts. I just like to have a look at, I like to go through and I like to see what they're writing, how do they approach it, and also what, in terms of their writing, does that approach tell us about their thoughts? So we don't just simply want to read someone when we're looking at the medicine. We want to understand what their writing is telling us about the way that they think and how that influenced their approach of the medicine as well. So from that perspective, I think it's very useful to look at that as well. So looking at the Wenbing Tiaobian, it's the first text that really breaks up the burners into upper burner, middle burner, and lower burner. And then it also has quite a large essay about warm diseases, which is called The Origin of Diseases. And then the last 3 chapters are actually essays, okay? Some miscellaneous theoretical discussions, then difficulties about pediatric care, and then difficulties about postpartum care as well. So he just writes essays on these other miscellaneous topics. And so I just thought I'll let you know. The first volume of this text here includes the first 3 chapters on that as well. So the prologue of the disease, upper burner and middle burner. Our books can basically only be a maximum of 550 pages. And I think this one clocks in at well, we don't include the prologue, but it was nearly 500 pages or so. So we pretty much got as far as we could in that text without with being what it could. So even if we wanted to include the lower burner, we couldn't actually fit it in. It would be too big of a text. So the question might be is then, what are warm diseases? Okay. So in chapter 1 of the upper burner section, Wú Jūtōng says that warm diseases encompass wind warmth, warm heat, warm epidemic, warm toxin, summer heat warmth, damp warmth, autumn dryness, winter warmth, and warm malaria. Okay. So he says that basically these 9 diseases come from. And where did these 9 diseases actually come from? If you guys remember, we were talking about Wang Shu He and writing I forget what it's called, that there's like notes on the or discussion on the notes or something of the cold damage. But this comes from that chapter where he kind of comes back and says, well, these are warm diseases in there. Now, how does he then? We looked back and we saw this is how he structures the main chapters of the text, but each of the texts actually also has sub-chapters as well. So then he breaks down the text like this, at least the burner chapters do. So, and he'll group the diseases together as well. Now, what's interesting here, and I actually haven't seen anyone in Chinese write about this yet, but he seems to include a new disease, latent summer heat, okay? Because that wasn't included in those 9 diseases, but for some reason he also doesn't. He writes a chapter about it, but he also doesn't include it in the ones that he wrote about in his intro chapter when he's writing about warm diseases. So I'm not sure why he chose to include a new disease and didn't write this one. I don't know. If anyone ever finds that out, please let me know. But I haven't seen many people write about it in Chinese either. But anyway, that's interesting. But you can see like each of the upper burners have their own kind of categories of diseases as well. Now, how does he break it? How do we break it down? So each kind of lines have each chapter kind of, well, the burner chapters, the first one, it has 58 lines, 46 formulas. Then so I'll put that there. The middle burner also, it has 102 lines, 88 formula. And then the lower burner had 78 lines, 46 formula. Look, Some people, I've read some different numbers about how many formula are in there, but that's because there are some formulas that are slight modifications of others. So, don't if you've come up with a different number than that, don't be about that. But that's a pretty good average number of what's included as well. But you can see what I actually found interesting was that when I was looking at this was that they include a lot of discussion about the middle burner as well, which is, I found that quite interesting. Okay, so now if we break down the upper burner chapter, we can kind of see how much discussion there is on the various chapters as well. So, just looking at that, there's not, if we look at it, there's quite a bit, but this one covers a lot of diseases. Then summer heat warmth, late in summer heat, damp warmth, cold damp, warm malaria, and autumn dry. And it's not too much on those ones as well. So that just gives you guys a little bit of a understanding of how this book is written, of how it's kind of broken down as well. Because I don't know, I always find that interesting. It's the same thing when in Chinese you see people write about the structure of the Shanghanlun as well. They'll talk about the Shanghanlun having 398 lines and maybe like 113 formula, something like that. So they'll number the lines and things like that. So I always think it's when people write about things and you see it kind of continually written about, I try to pay attention to that because if smart people are writing about something, then I think it's probably something that I should pay attention to, especially if it is repeated a few times. So we're going to talk a little bit about the origin of the disease as well, because there's some interesting things that I think have also been misrepresented in Chinese medicine, and we're going to see that. So this comes from the origin of disease, the original chapter, the first chapter of the Wenbing Tiaobian, and Wú Jūtōng says he's quoting the Su Wen, wherein he goes, "The Great Discourse, Su Wen chapter 5. Great discourse on corresponding phenomena of yin and yang states, if joy and anger are not restrained, if cold and summer heat exceed the norms, vitality will no longer remain secure. Thus, the dual presence of yin will inevitably become yang, and the dual presence of yang will unavoidably become yin. Therefore, it is said, damage by cold during winter will inevitably lead to an affliction by warmth in the following spring." That's like a very kind of famous statement here as well. And in various parts of the early chapters of the Su Wen, and even I think in the introduction to the Shahanlun, they quote these lines as well of these what some people might say that those are the basis for latent evils as well. I still need to do some more research to come up with a proper argument there, so I'm not going to talk about that. But we then talk about line 3, and it says that discourse on the true words in the Golden Cabinet states that essence is the foundation of the body. Therefore, if the essence is stored, there will be no disease of warmth in spring. So this basically says, it's counteracting that point before. But one of the things that we have to think about is what is essence, okay? And I really think that this idea of essence as being well, I don't know if you could say mistranslated, but rather perhaps not properly represented. So what does Wú Jūtōng say about that? Okay. He says that in his commentary, he says the classic of changes, the I Ching states, when frost is trodden upon, it signifies that solid ice will soon arrive. The sages offered this timeless guidance, advocating for caution from the earliest onset and vigilance over even the slightest signs of troubles, preventative medicine. The Book of Rites states all affairs with adequate preparation will succeed. The Book of Rites being one of the Confucian classics. So this phrase, failing to store essence, should be interpreted with a degree of inflexibility. It is not limited to sexual taxation, but it also encompasses all human activities that may agitate and stir the essence. So once it's not just about having too much food or anything like that. It could be about excessive sweating, eating poor food that won't actually then engender your own essence within as well. So I think we have to sometimes rethink about what essence means. I would say that there's obviously perhaps two ideas. There's the essence of the kidney essence being our kind of finite essence, but then there's also the essence of the body that gets made when we digest things as well, like our sweat, our humors, and things like that. And when we expend those too much, then we also might cause a disease, not just having, too much sexual taxation. So in line 2.2, it states, all diseases of warmth commence in the upper burner at the hand Tai Yin. So whenever I read the lines, I always like to think a little bit about what they're referencing, okay? So first off, what's our reference there? Yetianshi, line 1 from the Treatise on Warm Disease, where it says, when warm evil intrudes into the upper burner, it initially invades the lung, okay? So that's where he's quoting there. And then another thing to think about is what happens in cold damage compared to warm disease, okay? So here, it's saying at the hand Tai Yin, which is obviously, the lung. But what happens in cold damage is that, cold damage usually, where's this initial strike? Tai Yang, okay? It usually strikes, they say, the back of the neck, Tai Yang. And that's why I think, they treat it with like, what is it, like Feng Che and Feng Fu as well, the acupuncture points that they think they use for it. I might have those wrong. Sorry. But that's kind of comparing it as well. And there's also, it's far too long to talk about, but in the in line 2, that 2.1, Wú Jūtōng he has a really incredible discussion where he talks about the difference between Tai Yang bladder and Tai Yin lung, as both governing the exterior as well. So I would really recommend having a look at that. So give me a moment, please. So another little interesting thing to talk about is that when we're translating and when we're speaking about Chinese medicine, I just thought about this because this is something that maybe a lot of people haven't thought about. But when you're translating, you do need to be as precise as you can. When we talk about Chinese medicine, we actually shouldn't say lungs. We should only say lung. Okay, why? Well, I believe it's like 1935 or 36 where it says there's only one organ, only one lung organ that has two, and that's the kidneys. So when we talk about the lung in Chinese medicine, they only viewed it as one organ as well, not as two that we do in Western medicine when we say lungs. And in my opinion, that's because the lungs were like quite close together and arguably, they get connected by the trachea in the tubes, right? Whereas the kidneys, if you were to see them in a body, they're quite isolated from each other as well. So anyway, I that's just a little bit of semantics that I thought was interesting as well. And even here, we talk about the upper burner, okay, being related to like the lung, the pericardium, and the heart. One of the interesting things that when I was reading this book that I always thought about was that why do they include, and you've probably thought of this, about the liver and kidneys in the lower burner, okay? Now this comes down to, in my opinion, a little bit of theory. The first time that I see the liver mentioned as lower burner is actually Wang Bing's commentary of the Su Wen in something like 673 or something like that, 7th century. I don't know the exact date, but he's writing actually a commentary on the 19 lines, and he says that diseases of the lower relate to the liver and the kidneys as well. But there's somewhat of an argument that you could argue, or so, that wasn't good English, sorry. But when we think about this idea of looking at the 4 seasons, okay, we talk about the liver being spring. What is spring? Spring is the yang of the yin, okay? Then it moves into summer, which is the yang of the yang. And then it moves into that's been represented with the heart. Then we go to autumn. Autumn, what is autumn? Autumn is the yang, the yin of the yang, okay? And that's autumn dryness, the lungs, and then we move into the yin of the yin, which is the kidneys and water and winter and cold. So you can actually see spring being yang of the yin, there's the quality of it being below. Okay. So that, in my opinion, is why they included in the lower burner, But it depends on how you want to follow the arguments. But okay. So what is warm disease actually? Line 2.3 states that when Tai Yin is afflicted by disease, the pulse is neither moderate nor tight. Instead, it is stirred and rapid. Alternatively, on both sides, only the Chun pulses are large. In addition, there's heat in the cupid skin, that's the forearm, headache, mild aversion to wind and cold, generalized heat, spontaneous sweating, either thirst or cough without thirst, and severe heat in the afternoon. This is warm disease. Okay. Now, once again, if you studied a little bit of Shanghai Lun, there's probably a few things that you're kind of thinking about referencing there. Okay. The first thing that I would say is that when we look at this line, Wei Bing, where does that come in? That comes in up here, okay? That's a direct quote. Well, that kind of like syntax, this here is how it's written about like Wei Bing, things like that, in the Shanghan Lun. So we can see that his style of writing is paying homage to Zhang Zhongjing, okay? What else is there? Okay, we're looking at pulse. What are the two other interesting things that we think about with pulse? Sorry, I'm just flicking back between the two of them. Is that we see, okay, it's neither moderate nor tight. Okay, now my argument is that I'm not actually a big fan of translating this character Huan as moderate. Moderate to me implies that it's not in a disease state. When this pulse Huan is in a disease state, I believe it's probably better translated as slack. Okay. And this comes from I believe it's line 2 of the Shanghai Lun, where they talk about Zhongfeng having a slack or moderate pulse. And then in line 3 of the Shanghai Lun, they talk about Shanghan, or I might have got those two mixed up if I did. Sorry if I did, but they talk about that having a tight pulse as well. So both these mentions of pulses are differentiating it from lines 2 and 3 of the Shanghan Lun, okay, to say that this pulse will be stirred and rapid. So one of the key ways that you need, if you're looking at these symptoms and you're thinking, oh, this is a little bit hard to differentiate a warm disease from a cold damage or wind strike, then you really need to pay attention to the pulse, okay? And then, obviously, yeah, disease symptomology as well is what's really important there as well, along with pulse. So one thing that I found interesting was in this book that just gives us a little bit of a differential diagnosis. So cold damage, fever, chills, no sweating, possibly dry retching cough, a floating type pulse, Zhongfeng, fever, sweating, aversion to wind, floating slack pulse, avoid cool acrid formulas. Wú Jūtōng's distinction, there will be both have headache and aversion to cold, possibly fever and sweating. Differentiating factor, you got to look at the pulses being maybe rapid and strong, but they're not sorry, that should be moderate, not relaxed, or slack rather, and tight. Um He says, in warm diseases, the pulse is never floating, sinking, but they might feel strong, long, slippery, and rapid upon moderate pressure. Very famous commentator on the Wenbing Taobian, a guy called Chao Bingnan, he says that the right hand pulse is typically more pronounced in warm disease than the left. And he says that this is a result of internal heat stagnation. He says if the left pulse is stronger or floating and tight, this indicates a wind cold affliction and not a warm disease. Okay, so now we're going to get to the formulas as well. So we might move along a little bit quicker as well, okay? um he quotes entire yin wind warmth, warm heat, warm epidemic, winter warmth for those with an early onset of aversion to wind and cold, Wú Jūtōng governs. So this is actually the first time Wú Jūtōng mentions a formula in the Wenbing Taobian. And what formula is this from? This is the first formula that Zhang Zhongjing mentions in the Shanghan Lun. So he doesn't even start off with his own formula, which comes next, which is Yínqiào Sǎn, but he starts off with one of Zhang Zhongjing's formula as well. And I found a very interesting statistic where, according to a paper, it says that in the Wenbing Taobian, 37 of the formula are directly cited from the Shanghan Lun. 54 are modified from the Shanghan Lun formulas, and another 16 are also modified from the Jingui formulas as well. So for a total of 107 formulas out of this paper said there were 204. Previously, it said there was 198. So, there's 6 formulas missing or that could be changed. Over half of them are basically variations of the Shanghan Lun as well. So this will give you, if you're interested, quite an interesting insight into, possibly also different ways that you could use Shanghan formulas or modifications. But just to be also, he says that, these guidelines that he's given should not be applied to diseases of warm toxin, summer heat warmth, damp warmth, or warm malaria. So these two formulas are not fit for those use. All right. So let's talk a little bit about Yínqiào Sǎn now that we've kind of entered that and discussed it. I think that this will probably go for about another 40 minutes as well. So if you do need to leave early, that's fine. Just come watch the video that's recorded. So Zheng Swan, this is the author that I mentioned earlier. He states that Yínqiào Sǎn basically consists of 6 groups of herbs, each with distinct roles. Okay, he has warm pungent herbs being Jingjie and Dolce, cool herbs Bolhe and Yubangzi as well. He says that these ones, they work together to disperse wind heat and relieve stagnation in the Wei level. Jiegang and Yubangzi also work together to promote the dispersal of lung qi. Jiegang, Shenggansao combined with Yubangzi and Bolhe. These ones are to help move any stagnation, but also to help relieve throat pain. And if you guys notice that Jiegang and Gansao also is another formula from the Shangalun called Jiegansao. Jiegantang. Sweet cold herbs. They're to help clear heat and help resolve evils. Jinyanhua Lianqiao. Lugen is also used as a sweet cold herb to clear heat and generate fluids. And Zhuye, which is sweet, bland, and cold. It also is to clear heat, but also to promote urination as well as a method of guiding heat outwards. So one thing that I presented this at a ACMAC as well, and these are just a couple of pictures that I've got of herbs. This one is Bolhe. So one thing that I like to look at is always to see how ideas of herbs, because if you think about it, how do we know that they've been using the same herbs? Well, they've been drawing pictures of them for a very long time. They've written about where they were cultivated, what time to pick them, how to look after them. So they've really looked at a lot of different ways of herbs. I'd like to see the kind of different ways that they were presented and looked at as well. So that one is also Bolhe as well. This one is Jininhua as well, which is some really, really cool artwork. And this one is Lianqiao. But I just thought we'd have a quick discussion of Lianqiao because I wonder about its use. Where I was reading a text called the Lun by Lei Fang, a Qing dynasty physician, and he talks about this method to eliminate heat and open the orifices. And he goes, this method treats patterns of heat entering the heart pericardium. Lianqiao, which is that should be bitter cold, not better. Sorry. Bitter enters the heart, utilizing cold to overcome heat and draining the fire evil in the heart channel as well. So this makes me wonder whether or not Lianqiao is sometimes included in a way that like Shengjiang, Dazao, Gansao are included in Guizhitong and Xiaochaiyutong as a way of protecting this damage falling inwards or to protect the heart from having this counterflow heat coming inwards as well. Anyway, that's kind of just a little theory of my own. So a question might be is how did Wú Jūtōng come up with these formulas? Okay. Zheng Swan, he argues that there are 4 main ways that he came up with one, inspired by 3 previous famous physicians, Yu Jiayan, Li Dongyuan, Ye Tianshi, and then he also argues that it comes from the Neijing as well. So, first off, how is it from the Neijing? What does he quote? He quotes flavor principles, which is treat internal wind with pungent cool herbs, treat internal heat with salty cold herbs. These are from the Su Wen chapters like 66 to 74. I'm not sure exactly which one, but it's around there. So he says that this foundation principle informed balanced pungent cool approach of Yinqiao Sǎn. Should also be noted that these kind of flavor profile and applications have been applied to the Shanghalun as early as a commentator called Cheng Wuji in about 10th or 11th century. So he also looks at this idea of talking about treating the three burners by Yu Jiayan or Yu Cheng. If you guys remember him, he was the one who discussed about the form of this of the Sangju. And he goes, Yu Jiayan proposed that when pestilential evils invade the human body, they may disturb the three burners sequentially. To combat this, he says aromatic herbs must be used to dispel evils. He says starting from the upper burner before addressing the middle and lower burners. So basically, he argues that you treat each burner kind of moving downwards. Uh, sorry, Wutong is also Wú Jūtōng's other name as well. One thing that when you start reading about doctors in Chinese is that you realize that they have sometimes two or three names, and it can get a little bit confusing. So, but this is quoting from his discussion in the book. He goes, I used Li Dongyuan's Qingxin Liangesan, which employs pungent, cool, and bittersweet herbs. Wú Jūtōng states, at this initial stage of warm disease, I removed Huang Qin, and Zhang Wan says he also removed Jie, which enters the interior to prevent the formula from encroaching on the middle burner. Because remember, he wants to treat the upper burner. He doesn't want the heat. He doesn't want any like real treatment on the middle burner. Okay. So he said he instead added Jinhua, which is pungent and cool, Jingjie, which is aromatic and dispersing, and Yubangzi. These pungent and mild herbs moisten the lung, resolve heat, dissipate nodules, and clear wind to benefit the throat. So these herbs are all herbs that target the Han Taiyin lung channel. So basically, he's saying that I started with this formula and modified it to just basically only treat the upper burner as well. So we also see references to Ye Jinshe's line 1. Wú Jūtōng states, this formula is remarkable for its ability to prevent and protect against vacuity. It focuses exclusively on clearing and depurating the upper burner without encroaching on the middle and lower burners. It not only avoids the mistake of opening the door to invite robbers, but also possesses the capability of removing repletion with light medicinals. When applied properly, its effectiveness naturally follows. As this method was devised by Master Ye Tianxue himself, it far surpasses those of other masters. So, oh, sorry, did I just go? Oh, yeah, sorry, I skipped slide. Let me go back one. So where does this formula come from? Well, Zhang Wansuan argues that this actually comes from a case by Ye Tianxue, where he says a monk 52 years old contracted a windworm disease attacking the upper burner. The Chun pulse was markedly large, indicating the lung was scorched by heat. If you guys remember, in 2.3, one of the differentiating features of warm disease is a strong Chun. His voice was weak and he was unable to raise it. Treatment began with pungent cool herbs to clear the upper burner, along with dietary adjustments to maintain light and bland foods for 10 days. The prescription was, you guys can read that. But you can see there's quite a similarity between, not that much similarity between it, but there's a few there. But how do you say? Only Bohe and Yubangzi are there from the formula, but I think he argues that it's about this kind of case is the similar idea of warm disease and the treatment. Oh, modifications. These are just from the book. You guys can read these in your own time. Characteristics and mechanisms of Yínqiào Sǎn. So some clinical applications and adjustments according to Zhang Wansuan. It says when wind heat stagnation and defense level is severe, little to no sweating, you can increase the dosages of Jingjie, Douche, and Bohe. When lung qi is constrained with coughing as the main symptom, you can also add in Xingren, or optionally add Zhebei Mu. Now, interestingly, Xingren, also, if you've studied the Shang'an, you remember that one of the modifications for Guizhiteng is Guizhijia Hopo Xingzheteng, so adding Hopo and Xingren to treat cough. When wind heat blocks the throat, causing severe throat swelling, you can add Suan Shen. You also may include Shigan, Chantui, and Jiangsan. I haven't used any of those herbs. Well, Chantui or Jiangsan personally. He also says that when heat toxins are severe with fever, redness, or swelling, and pain as the primary symptoms, you can add the cooling herbs like Jinhua and Lianqiao. But he also said, you might add in Jie or Huangqin to clear heat and drain fire. Those two herbs that were removed from Li Dongyuan's original formula. If urination is short and reddish, indicating heat shifting to the small intestine, you may also add in Zhu Ye or Zhi and Maidong. When fluid injury is evident, with dryness in the mouth, lips, nose, tongue, you may also increase Lugan or add Shuanshen or Maidong. And when the pathogen has reached the nutritive and blood levels with rashes or papules or petage, you can add Shengdi Huang, Mudan Pi, Chirshao, Daqingye, Shuanshen, those kind of real blood level, blood layer cooling herbs. So he talks a little bit about how he might apply this. He goes, this combination of Jinyonghua, Lianqiao, and also he might add Jizhe to this formula can dissipate qi level constrained fire. So where he will use that in symptoms such as throat swelling and pain, toothache with gum swelling, red and itchy eyes, headache, irritability, agitation. If modified with Shengji Huang, Slansheng, Chishao, Wudempi, or we don't use Shijiao Di Huang Tang. This is just what they write about in the Chinese books. He says it is effective for conditions such as epistaxis, so coughing of blood, early stage rashes, eruptions and allergic reactions, skin disorders with eruptions, or inflamed abscesses or sores. Now, this is one of Zhang Xiaoqin's Zhang Wenshuan's teachers, a guy called Zhao Xiaoqin. And he also authored several books. He talks a little bit about his interpretation of wind herbs in fire stagnation. And so he commentates a little bit on the second line of the Wen Rulun, where he says this concept of dispersing wind outward from heat should be broadly interpreted. It is not limited to dispersing wind evils. Instead, it also applies to symptoms caused by fire stagnating, such as redness, swelling, heat, and pain. So he says, for example, red and swollen eyes indicate wind, fire, internal heat. Toothache with redness and swelling indicates wind, fire, toothache. So he kind of is trying to broadly interpret this idea of wind, fire, and heat. So he further says that these conditions can benefit from adding wind herbs as they help release fire stagnation. This aligns with the principle of releasing fire stagnation by dispersing it outward. Ye's concept of dispersing wind outward from heat is not solely confined to wind heat as the exterior, but also applies to warm heat, fire stagnation, allowing the inclusion of wind dispersing herbs. So, for example, he says that in expanding his use of Yínqiào Sǎn for miscellaneous diseases, he says that Zhao noted that fire stagnation syndromes are not only seen in warm diseases, but also commonly in miscellaneous diseases. This is one of the mechanisms by which Yínqiào Sǎn can be widely applied to treat miscellaneous conditions. So this is the way that people will, have in the past have expanded the use of, for example, formulas like Wú Jūtōng, Xiao Chaihu Tang, or Xie Tangs. He's arguing that when there's this manifestation of kind of stagnant wind heat, you can also look at employing Yínqiào Sǎn. All right. Now on to Sangju Yǐn. And then at the end, we'll do some case studies, okay? So how did he come up with Sangju Yǐn, okay? Well, first off, whenever I ever teach something, I always try to find the source of where it came from. And that's why we named our academy the Academy of Source-Based Medicine, because we always want to bring things back to their source, try to understand it through their eyes, and then look at how people have interpreted it across the time and try to find the best of that. A little bit like what Wú Jūtōng did himself in the systematic differentiation of warm diseases. So line 2.6, it says, in Taiyin, wind warmth for those primarily with cough, accompanied by generalized heat that is not severe and just a mild first, the gentle acrid cooling formula Sāngjú Yīn governs. It's also quoted again in line 2.55, where it says, for those who develop a cough after contracting dryness, Sāngjú Yīn governs. So one interesting thing that I thought about dryness, and is also throughout Chinese medicine, dryness has been a little bit of a controversial topic, particularly because when Lu Wansu wrote his book about the 19 pathomechanisms, dryness was not included. So he actually added his own lines there. But furthermore, there was, if you guys remember, we were talking about Yu Yan or Yu Cheng. He also wrote a little bit about dryness in his text. And Wú Jūtōng actually quotes this from him. And he goes, so Wú Jūtōng states, a predecessor once stated, among the six qi, only dryness does not manifest as a disease. However, this does not seem entirely accurate. The opinion likely arose because the inner canon lacks a line about the contraction of dryness in autumn. And nevertheless, during years when Yang Ming is in charge of heaven, how could there not be a disease of dry metal? So, this is just about theoretical arguments. But he goes, all cases of huffing and suppression pertain to the lung, refers to instances of lung dryness. That's a quote from the 19 lines. However, in both ancient and contemporary formula for treating qi suppression, acrid and aromatic substances are invariably used to move qi. As such, none of these formula can address lung dryness. Even when panting is correctly identified as lung condition, physicians invariably resort to effusing the condition or precipitating, thus consistently moving qi or draining qi. While moistening formula may be occasionally used once or twice, the core issue remains unaddressed. In short, the inner canon passages regarding the six qi omitted mention of damage caused by dryness qi in autumn and mistakenly referenced to late summer dampness as autumn dryness. So that just comes back to one of the quotes from the Neijing. And he continues, as later generations did not dare alter or correct these statements, they chose to overlook this one qi of dryness altogether. However, when there's clearly understood how to rectify dryness, they prescribed medicinals in an eclectic manner, resembling the futile act of attempting to catch flying insects with retrievable arrows, lacking any consistent approach that could be shared with others. Now I've devised this formula and named it Qingxiao Zhufei Teng, or dryness clearing lung rescuing decoction. And as a whole, my emphasis is on the stomach qi, as stomach earth serves as a mother of lung metal. So I'll just quickly talk about this. Although Tianmandong can protect the lung, its bitter flavor stagnate qi. I'm concerned that it may damage the stomach, cause obstruction, and generate phlegm, so I've chosen not to include it. Similarly, while Junmu can enrich kidney water and clear lung metal, I've avoided it as well due to its bitter flavor. Bitter and cold substances, which are typically primarily medicinals for descending fire, are particularly contraindicated in this instance. This is because after being affected by dryness, the metal lung retains only a thin thread of yin qi. If bitter cold substances further descend the lung qi and damage the stomach, how could there be any way for that person to survive? So that's a interesting discussion about flavor and whether or not we need to be cautious when using bitter flavors in dry conditions. So what is Sangju composed of? Xingren, Lianqiao, Bohe, Sangye, Juhua, Jigen, Gancao, and Lugen is what they use it. So both formulas have Juhua, Bohe, and Gancao and Lianqiao. So nearly half crossover. So Sangju Yǐn Zhengwen Suan argues that, like he broke down Yínqiào Sǎn, he breaks down Sangju Yǐn, where she says that the five groups of herbs Bohe, Sangye, Juhua, which are acrid, cool medicinals to disperse wind heat. Xingren, which frees lung qi and stops cough. Jiegang and Gansao to open obstructions and benefit the throat. Lianqiao, sweet cold medicinal that clears heat and resolves toxicity. And Lugen, which preserves and protects body fluids, used in much the same way as in Yinqiao Sǎn. So modifications, these come directly from the text as well. You guys, they kind of just trying to imitate the Shanghan Lun a little bit, but you guys can read these in your own time as well. So how did Wú Jūtōng come up with Sangju Yǐn? Zhang Wensuan argues that it was all based on Ye Tianshe's cases. Okay. First case, patient aged 12, wind warm, attacking the upper region, presenting with cough, loss of voice, throat pain, treated with Xingren, Bohe, Lianqiao, Jiegang, Shengansao, and Shogun. Patient Xiang, age 21, wind warmth, vacuous pulse, and cough, treated with Sangye, Boye, Bohe, Xingren, Xiangbei, Dasha, Shen, and Lianqiao. 10-year-old with headache, cough caused by wind warmth invasion of the upper, prescribed Lianqiao, Bohe, Xingren, Jiegang, Shengansao, and Xiangbei. Patient Qin, age 63, physically blood deficient with wind warmth attacking the upper region. Nourishing and clearing treatments gave no effect because the dryness had reached the qi division, so the plan was to clear the upper, Shugao, Shengansao, Bohe, Sangye, Xingren, and Lianqiao. So these are the four cases from Ye Tianxue that Zhang Wenxuan believes influenced Wu Jūtōng. And what's quite interesting here is that if we look at cases 1, 2, and 3, they're all under the section of cough. The fourth patient is also under the wind warmth. Okay. So that tells us a little bit about, what kind of difference we're looking for treating these diseases. So, a clinical pattern according to Zhang Wenxuan. He says that in Wutong's original indications, cough, mild fever, or heat effusion, slight fist, and or cough due to dryness invasions. These are the main ones to look at. So, when he's looking at it with dispersing wind heat with Bohe and Sangye, these will correspond to wind heat binding the exterior. So, those kinds of symptoms like fever, aversion to wind, while you use Xingren to vent the lung, which corresponds to impaired lung flow, so which will cause something like cough, while you'll have Jiegang and Gansao to dissipate nodules, and this will often relate to obstruction or pain in the throat. And obviously, that combination of Jiegang and Gansao is Jiegang tongue from the Shanghalun, the Sha Yin chapter. With Lianqiao, that's going to correspond to clearing heat and eliminating patterns. So what you might see with that is like the fever, red tongue, red and swollen throat. And while clearing heat in the Qi division is Lugen is responsible for that, and that will help clear any fluid damage, i.e., dry tongue, thirst, scanty urine as well. And finally, Sangye and Juhua, they will help disperse wind heat if there's any liver constrained fire, so possibly headache, red eyes, or nasal dryness. So when you're looking at these kinds of symptoms, this is kind of the herbs that are treating these ways that it manifests as well. So, probably the simplest way to look at it is that Zhang Wenxuan sums it up as that Yinqiao's mild form of Yínqiào Sǎn with focus primarily on cough corresponds to Sāngjú Yǐn. So if the person doesn't have that strong of a heat disease, go with Sangju Yīn. If it's a stronger and it's not just a cough, but there's stronger signs of heat, perhaps with a stronger pulse on the chuns, go with Yinqiao Sǎn. Now, this is just another thing that you can look at your own time, but there's a famous author in China, and he kind of had a look at different formula families for Yinqiao Sǎn, and he actually even put Sangju Yīn under the Yinqiao formula family as well, under there as well. So he views it as a variation of Yinqiao Sǎn, which I thought was interesting. All of these ones, I'm pretty sure, are all in the Wenbing Tiabian. These other ones, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure Yinqiao decoction is also in the Wenping Taobian. Now, we'll have a look at a few cases and we'll close it there. We might just be another like 10 minutes or so, and then if there's any questions, we can have a chat. So some cases, okay. First off, we'll look at is Qinbo Wei. Now, obviously, because these formulas are relatively recent, there aren't as many like early cases because this text was only written in 1798, so we kind of only have more modern cases. But Qinbo Wei was a very, very famous modern, I think, Shanghai physician. They used to call him, I think, Neijing Qin because he apparently had memorized nearly the entire Neijing, which is an incredible feat, you know. So he has a case here. Mr. Zhao seen on the fourth day of the fourth lunar month. Pulse presentation. All six pulses were floating, wiry, and rapid. He says a wiry pulse suggests wind. A floating pulse indicates an exterior condition. A rapid pulse indicates heat. The main symptom was severe throat pain. So he says, according to the doctrine of warm diseases, Mao Yao Zhongqi, which is just it's this idea for when heat, I think, strikes. I'm not so familiar with that theory myself. Although a patient has severe headache, body aches, pronounced aversion to cold, one should not mistakenly use warm, acrid medicinals. Instead, it is necessary to employ acrid, cool, aromatic herbs to clear and treat the upper jiao because the upper jiao here corresponds to the body's exterior. So what is this formula? Jiageng Douche, Jinian Hua, New Bangsa, Lian Chao, Jingjie, Lugan, Bohe. So those are the main core herbs from Yinqiao Sǎn, and then he has another two herbs, Renzhong Huang and Yujin added to it as well. So he says after one dose, the exterior was released and the symptoms improved significantly. After the second dose, the fever completely subsided. By the sixth day of the fourth lunar month, although the fever was gone, the throat pain persisted. Thus, the patient was given Daijen Pujisan to be taken 3 times a day. Within 4 days, the throat pain had completely resolved. I'm not sure what's in that formula myself. So this is a case by Wú Jūtōng. Mr. Liu, 17 years old, 24th day of the fifth lunar month. In the third lunar month during spring warmth pattern, the patient had a choking cough with streaks of blood. His pulse is now wiry and thin. Around the fifth watch, i.e., between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., he has single bouts of severe coughing. This is described as wood knocking metal, causing a ringing sound. That might be like a specific TCM, like a specific phrase. I'm not sure. Given that wind arises from wood's TCM 5 phases. The plan is to use acrid sweet to transform wind and sweet cool to soften wood. The prescription was Lianqiao, Bohe, Ku Jiegang, Sangye, Cha Ju Hua, Gansao, Lugang, Xi Shengdi, Maidong, and Tiandong. So he's adding a lot more of these moistening and blood layer herbs as well. These ones, I think these ones are all in the original prescription for Yínqiào Sǎn. And so he says, 4 days later, the patient returned. The coughing had decreased, appetite improved, but the pulse was still flooding and rapid, more pronounced on the left side than the right. Since there was improvement, the formula was not changed, and the patient was instructed to continue with another 4 to 5 doses. On June 2nd, the third consultation found that wood knocking metal phenomenon had already improved under the strategy of softening the liver and clearing the lung. The left pulse liver side had also decreased in its flooding rapid nature. The revised formula removed herbs targeting chi level heat and added sweet and moistening ingredients. And unfortunately, in the case, he doesn't mention the new formula, so we don't actually know what that was. Okay. Sometimes, sorry, that's really bright. Sometimes in the cases that they leave us, they're like, if you remember Ye Tianxiu's cases, they were very succinct, just 1 or 2 symptoms and formula. Sometimes no doses, sometimes no pulse, sometimes just symptoms. It really depends on the doctor about how much information they give us and how thorough cases are. Some are very detailed, and some are leave a lot to be desired as well. Or they leave us to try and figure out the specifics of the case. Okay, Zhang Wanshuan, he had a case for a lady, 32 years old, visited September 7th, 2005. 1 month of coughing without aversion to wind or feverish sensation. The cough resembled bouts of whooping cough with scanty, sticky phlegm. Throat felt dry, itchy, painful. Cough was easily triggered by loud speaking, automobile exhaust, or even any noise stimulation. Throat would become itchy, and itching led to coughing. The patient also felt severe pain in the chest, bilateral hypochondria during coughing. She had to press both hands on these areas to lessen the jarring pain. Taking a deep cough also caused costal pain. The tongue was red with a bright tip and thin yellow coating. The pulse was wiry, slippery, and slightly rapid. And Zhang Wanshuan addresses this as a Sāngjú Yǐn pattern. So his dose was Sangye, Juhua, Xingren, Bohe, Jiegang, Lianqiao, Lugan, Jebeimu, Xuanfu Ha, Yujin, Jiechao, and Gualo Pi. So he added quite a few extra herbs there to treat as well. So he's probably just looking there to try and treat more that hypochondriac region with the Xuanfu Ha, Yuqin as well. 5 doses, and it resolved the the cough and the costal pain, sorry. So a case by Pufu Zhou, he was another famous physician as well. I'm not sure. I think he might have been in Sichuan, but I'm not entirely sure. Sorry. He had a patient, Mr. Han, male, 74 years old, came in March 28th, 1960. He had a fever last night, began running a fever, 38.5, slight cough, red throat. This morning, his temperature was 37.9 with dark yellow urine. Pulse was floating rapid. Tongue was red without coating. Diagnosis, wind, heat, common cold, treated with acrid cool. So his formula was Sangye, Juhua, New Bangsa, Lianqiao, Jiegang, Lugan, Jiangsan, Zhuye, Shangansao, Shangdouche, Bohe, and Tongbai. So I'm pretty sure the only one that isn't there is this Jiangsan and Tongbai were added. Um, so basically that's Lianqiao Sǎn as well. One of the things is that some of these doctors he didn't even write that it was Yinqiao Sǎn, but you're expected to know that's what's in the formula. So he has another one. He goes second visit, March 30th. After the medication, his fever subsided to 36.4, cough diminished, but phlegm remained somewhat sticky. The tongue was normal with no coating, pulse more moderate. So the cold is basically resolved strategy, harmonize lung and stomach, and simultaneously transform phlegm damp as well. So I'm not sure what this formula is based on. It's not one that I recognize. I'm sorry, but that's just the formula that he gave. Cool. So that's the end of the talk so far. Sorry, I had to rush through a little bit, but I'd only planned an hour and a half, and we've already kind of gone over time. So if you guys have any questions, otherwise I'm gonna head off. We will be putting up a YouTube video on our Academy of Source-Based Medicine account, so you can follow us on Facebook. China Books will send out the video as well, but probably not till next Tuesday or Wednesday because their guy only works on those 2 days as well. So look, I hope you enjoy it. I hope you guys will support the translations and of important works as well. And if you guys, I really encourage you, if you're studying the medicine, to study some Chinese language as well. I really feel like that was a turning point for me in my career as a Chinese medicine physician. I really and when you learn Chinese language and you can read Chinese medicine, it really is just the gift that keeps on giving because you'll have an endless amount of things to read in Chinese medicine, and it really is I think Chinese medicine is one of the best jobs and fields to be in because we really have 2,000 years of literature and writing that we can look back and discuss, and it's the more people out there who will translate things, the more that we'll have access to it as well. So, all right. It doesn't seem like there's any question. Well, someone has asked a question. Any chance in having access to the history of the practitioners you mentioned? Qinbo Wei, there have been writings by him, I believe by a guy called Jason Blalock, wrote a text by him about like 56 treatment prescriptions. Also, Chip Chase or Charles Chase wrote about essays translated by him. That's Qinbo Wei. Pu Fu Zhou, not aware of anything in English. Zheng Swan, also not aware of anything in English. Besides, I think maybe Greta Youngjie or Youngdejie, I'm not sure of how to pronounce her last name, but the lady in Melbourne, she might have some writings or discussions by some of those Wenbin guys like Jiang Swan and Zhao Shaoqin as well. Obviously, for the historical figures that we mentioned, there's almost nothing about them besides if you read some of the history books, and even then they just talk a little bit about them as well. I think we're in dire need of some people to write like some really good translations or books as well. Um, and sorry, I don't have any additional notes or anything like that. Just these are just things like that I read, and that's also why when I was doing the slides, I left a lot of them in translation, untranslated, just because I've just read them in Chinese, and I don't always think about how to translate the names. Because even, for example, looking at this text, the systematic differentiation, we argued whether or not we should call it warm diseases or warm disease. And it seems like such a unimportant thing to argue, but it actually is an important thing when you think about it, because is warm disease a singular, or is it an expansive term? And eventually we decided to go with warm diseases. Why? Because if you remember in the Wen Bing Tiaobian line 2.1, where it talks about it talks about warm diseases encompasses these 9 diseases. So it's not just a single disease. Warm disease is a category with a subset of multiple diseases as well. So in saying that, we should really look at doing we should call it multiple diseases as well. Um, Someone has also asked about translation courses. I think online you can look at people. I think one of my friends studied with a guy called Nicholas Herman Oving. I'm not sure if he's still doing courses. And there's also Sabine Wilms as well, who works in America as well. Um, they also have some books that you can read. There's a website called ctext.org where you can look at the Chinese characters as well, and you can always install what do you say? Like a browser add-on where you can hover over the character and it will tell you what character it means. Ctext also has the dictionary there and it has the classics as well, you know. Um I I hope you guys, enjoy this. I'm hoping to do maybe some more courses next year on herbs and possibly on the Wenbing Taobian. Currently, I'm teaching an acupuncture course online as well. And if you're interested, you can scroll up to the chat and find the links there. And there's the code as well. Let me just, if I put that code there, this coupon code for this course will bring it down from like 550 to I think 425 US as well. But my main interest is always been, well, usually was in acupuncture, which is what I've written about, but I've still really enjoy herbs, and I'm trying to I'm hoping that we can come together and improve how we practice Chinese medicine, because I don't know if you guys have heard it, but quite a few schools are closing around America as well. So, and I think a few schools have closed in Australia. So really, it's up to us to provide good beneficial treatments to the public so that people can rely on us and depend on us to treat them. And that way we can hopefully keep Chinese medicine around for a longer time, because we don't want to become like the other medicines like Greek medicine or Islamic medicine, things like that, where people just read about it in history. Chinese medicine is too good to be relegated to the history books. I think we all know that. um, Also, if you guys have any other questions, you're always welcome to reach out to me and contact me as well. Whether it's about the Wen Bing or about any of the classics or anything like that as well. Thank you so much for coming, guys. Have a lovely night, and I'll see you again. Bye bye.